Vous écoutez le trèfle, le podcast francophone des Boston Celtics.
So thank you for taking the time today. I think you must be like quite busy back in Boston at the moment. Like everybody must be talking about like, is it going to be Miami or Philly?
Yeah, it'll probably be one of those two. I can't imagine Atlanta or Chicago upsetting those teams. But Miami, you never know, especially with Rozier. I don't think Rozier can travel to Philly, so he might not even play if Philly wins tonight, and still might not play on Friday. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, I think as Celtics fan, I would even rather have Miami than Philly. But
Yeah, it's like Miami has sucked this year, but they're still Miami. I shouldn't say suck. They've been good, but like they're still Miami, and it just you always expect the best from them. They always tend to like in the playoff, and they just don't take the regular season seriously. Usually, it's really just kind of the chance for them to figure out who they are, and then they just flip the switch, and they're always at least second round teams. But I mean, like the thing is, like Miami has this extensive history that we all look at as like, oh, they're always going to make a deep run. But up until last year, they were a top seed. Like they were usually one of the top 2 or 3 seeds, and last year was the only year that they pulled a shocker, and they kind of had a crazy regular season, and so they got healthy, and the timing was right for them last year. This year they've tried to piece it together, but like they lost their good 2-way starters and Vincent and Stroots, and the guys they replaced them with aren't quite on that level. So, like maybe they're a big maybe, but as long as they have Butler and Bam, you always presume you always presume they're going to be highly competitive. So even if they lose in the first round, it's probably going to go to the distance. I assume.
yeah, definitely. But I think we'll finish with the playoff and the Celtics. But yeah, like where I wanted to start, since like you've been around the Celtics for a long time, and I think from what I found, like you were a big Rajon Rondo fan when
As a kid, I was, yeah.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah. When you started working for the Celtics, like Rajon Rondo wasn't like at the Celtics anymore. Like when did you actually start?
He was. So I started covering the Celtics for CLNS media in 2011, and Rondo was there until 2014, I would presume. 2015, maybe?
Yeah.
So he was, I covered him for my first few years.
And then, yeah, he kind of went berserk. Like, Boston had like a down year. And then since then, it's been like only like good point guard that the Celtics had. Like, with Isaiah Thomas, Kyrie Irving, Kemba Walker, Marcus Smart. I guess we can consider him as a point guard. And no Derrick White. Is there like souvenir you have, like, especially with like the Kyrie era or like Isaiah era, that like, because you talk with them quite often with like press conference and all that, like what was the vibe like being around Isaiah, for example?
I mean, Isaiah was one of the most interesting people that I've ever covered because one, the rise that he was going through was astronomical. I mean, he was like he was a solid player who was trying to find a true place in this league as a starter when he arrived in Boston. And when they got him, they didn't give up that much for him. And it was like, oh, this guy's solid, and maybe you can use him as a piece for a contender, but it's probably more of a 6-man. And when he first got to Boston, he played well, and then like, it very quickly took off. And so I think for a while was trying to validate himself to everybody. And IT has always been trying to do that. You see it to this day. He's like the one guy who's always tweeting, give me another shot. And it's amazing that he, once again, got another shot with Phoenix. And I'll never forget that January. which was, what was that, like 2017 or something like that, maybe 2018? It's hard to even remember these days. Probably 17, I would guess.
Yeah.
The January where he won Player of the Month with the Celtics, and he averaged like 30 a night. He had so many game winners. It was just a month straight of crunch time, ball in his hands, him and Al Horford, and he was hitting shot after shot after shot for like, it was like a month straight of these insane games. And it was one of the greatest stretches of basketball I've ever seen. And the entire time, he was this great blend of like both incredibly cocky, but also a little bit humble at the same time. He would find that balance really well. He was great to talk to. He was such a friendly guy. He loved engaging with people. You could tell that he understood how fortunate he was that he had finally gotten a chance to really thrive in the NBA and how improbable that was. And so that was one of the craziest rides I've ever witnessed up close in my time. He was a great guy and is still a great guy to this day. And he's one of those guys that every time I run into him, it's like we get to catch up and everything. And you know, he's always been like truly genuinely kind and approachable and also energetic.
Okay, and because like when you compare like him with Kyrie in like the perception that the people have, because we don't really know Kyrie from the outside, but it seems so different. And at the same time, like Kyrie seems to be someone unique that you kind of want to talk to, because the way you see things seems also different. So did you also have like souvenir of like your time being around Kyrie?
I mean, Kyrie, also, the word souvenir is usually like a gift or something like that. I assume it means something a little bit different.
Yeah, so in French it means memories. I don't know why I keep using souvenir, but no, I meant memories. My bad.
I mean, Kyrie was super conflicted because I always got along well with him. I think he's a fascinating human being. He's incredibly intellectually curious and creative, and he's a basketball poet for sure. He's one of the most fascinating players to watch. Kyrie just got so caught up in his anti-celebrity, or I guess anti-American celebrity dystopian treatment campaign that he went too far, to the point that he went from making a good point to just kind of becoming almost the enemy of the point he was making. And so, Kyrie he would be difficult for the sake of being difficult, not being difficult in response to something that actually made it fair. Like and also, there was just a lot of people that I talked to behind the scenes that just, that he didn't treat people like, with the same level of respect and kindness on a consistent basis, at least, than like a lot of these other guys would do. The reputation was not the same as Isaiah Thomas. And I'm sure Kyrie probably was great to a lot of people. And I know Kyrie is at least has a reputation among the people in his inner circle and people close to as being incredibly generous and loving and kind. But, it's kind of similar to Russell Westbrook, or even like a bunch of cousins I used to do stuff about this, where it's like, random staffers, although I guess random staffers and Russell Westbrook isn't fair, so I think he was really generous there too. But like people that aren't on his side, he treats them like an enemy. And I think generally, when you're a person as a public figure, you have to just be willing to let go of that frustration with the people that aren't really in your circle. And I understand with Kyrie that, especially with the Boston media, which honestly, like the Boston media is kind of misunderstood. Like there is like the general radio hosts and talk show hosts, and then like all the Nashville people, like the Stephen A. Smiths of the world, that are the ones that usually are causing they're giving the bad takes, that are causing the controversy, that are taking the stuff that happens down at the ground level and not applying the right context and understanding to it. And I think a lot of it's on purpose. A lot of it is just like, if you're not there, it's hard to really understand truly. And Kyrie was incredibly complicated. And I think as that went on, and especially when Kyrie went to New York, he saw it more and more as a fight for him to be able to live his life authentically. And unfortunately, at least in America, it's like, if you're famous, you don't get to live your life authentically. There's a consequence to doing that if you have to bite your tongue. And I think it's probably a part of being famous anywhere, really, right? At least in America, the pressure is kind of stupid and ridiculous and hypocritical to how everyone leads their lives. And that's why I actually appreciated so much of what Kyrie was standing for. But then, like, like the stuff he was doing about the flat Earth stuff, and then claiming he was doing it just to mess with people. Even if that is true, it still causes harm. Like it was just like it was dumb. And there were other ways that he could manipulate the public to prove how manipulatable the public is. And like that was just a bad way to do it. And then the whole stuff with when he posted the link to the anti-Semitic film, it's just like, he very easily could have just been like, he could have easily just like, I'm sorry, I wasn't promoting the bad stuff. I was just trying to show some parts of this that I think are important to me, but aren't about anti-Semitism. And he just dug in his heels because he didn't want to be told what to do. And so I think all of that stuff, not only did it overshadow a lot of the good things about Kyrie, but it also changed Kyrie's behavior publicly to be incredibly defensive. And it prevented Kyrie from really expressing the positives of who he is. And so, honestly, what was great was when he came to town earlier this year to Boston, I got a chance to talk to him a little bit, and he was like at peace, and he seemed happy. And it was good to talk to him. And I really enjoyed catching up with him. And like, it's like Kyrie, I think when he isn't caught up in that whole storm of BS, is a fascinating person who I enjoyed being with.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you can even get the vibe from like the quote that you see, and him with Luca this year seems to have like a better momentum, like things seems to be going well back in Dallas, and you can see more like of, I don't know, like the positive vibes that he can also brings. Like the balance was maybe more difficult to keep back in Boston. And then the guy that came after that was like Kemba Walker, who was like so different in terms of like personality from Kyrie, but the skill sets also help, like I think Jason Tatum develop a lot. And yeah, like Kemba seems to have bring so much good energy back in Boston, and he's kind of like the last guy that like he was the go-to guy kind of when he arrived, I feel like. And then once he left, we didn't look back as the Boston Celtics, and then he was like Jason Tatum team. So like, how was the transition from that? Like, how did Kemba maybe help Jalen to like be the star?
Yeah, at the time when they got Kemba, he was still an all-star.
Yeah.
And so he was great for the first 3 or 4 months, and then he got hurt, and his career fell apart after that. Just like Isaiah, when he hurt his hip in the playoffs and his career fell apart, Kemba never got healthy again, and he lost so much of his agility and explosiveness. And he already struggled defensively, and so Kemba had some solid moments. Like in the bubble, there were times where he played really well, but he just his body fell apart on him pretty quickly. It was unfortunate, but Kemba was probably, up to came through, the most genuinely engaging, probably someone I had the best relationship with, or at least up there for some of the best relationships I've had with somebody. He was just like an incredibly kind, like gentle person who genuinely engaged with people and formed friendships. And he kind of, when he arrived in Boston, he was everything that they hoped on and off the court. And I think he maintained being a pretty good part of the locker room as time went on. And so that transition you're talking about, as far as who's running the team, It was both a combination of Kemba got hurt and he just wasn't that player anymore. And then also Tatum and Brown were just finally getting through their probably third and fourth year in the league. And so they were just finally hitting that point where they were becoming players that could handle the ball and like actually like start to do significant stuff rather than being role players. And so, it's funny. It's really funny when you look back on anyone's career. And so Jalen and Jason are basically in their prime now, right? Like Jalen's he's at age 27, I think, right? So age 27 is generally when like the prime window really starts. Tatum's 26, he's basically entering that window as well. And they're complete offensive players. JT is a much better playmaker than Jalen. Jalen's a better mid-range scorer and finisher at the rim, and tempo, high-paced player than JT. But they're both really, really, they're both great players, frankly. It's hard to remember when Jalen first got to the league, he used to dribble the ball off his foot when he tried to run the fast break. Like literally, it was for rookie year. We were watching him like, this guy's supposed to be a transition player. He can't even dribble down the floor. Now he's like a top 5 transition player in the NBA. Tatum, his whole game was the mid post, and he was awful at it when he got to the NBA. And you had a terrible second season. It wasn't terrible, but you had a down year second year, and people were like, "Is this guy even really an all-star?" And at that moment, I thought, "Oh, he's definitely going to be an all-NBA first-game caliber player." You're starting to see there's something trying to do, and that's exactly how it turned out. And so at that time, those guys weren't even close to being ready to run, pick and roll. Jason Tatum wasn't even good at handling double teams until like his fifth or sixth year, probably. So they couldn't do any of the stuff that Kemba was doing routinely. And so when Kemba came on board, it was the sense of, as the Jays kind of start to become a little bit of a scorer, and you can like do more than just pass them the ball as they're cutting, and they can score off of that. Like Kemba's going to be the one to set everything up. And so as Gordon Hayward started to come back and like kind of find his rhythm, it's like that team, almost all those guys intersected of their health and skill development at the right time. They probably would have won a championship if that had happened. Like, just you look at the bubble. It's like Hayward got hurt during the bubble. Kemba, I think he had a couple tweaks. Like, even if just Hayward just stayed healthy in the bubble, there's a good chance they would have won that championship. Like, they got pretty close with Hayward missing most of it, then coming back. I think it was late in the series against Miami, and he wasn't quite himself. But Hayward looked really good at the start of the bubble. And they got really close. And so it would have been really interesting to see if they had won the championship that year and Kemba wasn't quite that good, but helped lead the team. It'd be really interesting to wonder how Kemba would be looked at in Celtics history.
Yeah.
If they got it.
Definitely, because even Gordon Hayward, he left after the bubble, I think, but for wing, he was the wing that was the good fit next to Jalen and Jason, because he doesn't need the ball that much, but he can be the connector between those two. He can be the playmaker. He can help out also at kind of point forward, and he could shoot, play defense. And yeah, I feel like it's kind of like the biggest what if in the recent history, because he get injured the first game and everything. There is Gordon Hayward is a big what if, but within Gordon Hayward there is different what if during the Kyrie's time, and there is Kemba's time, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, Hayward was kind of like Derek White, but as a big forward.
Yeah.
His ability to do a little bit of everything at a high level. He did pretty much everything. He was a good pick and roll playmaker.
Yeah.
He was a good mid-range scorer. He could get to the rim and throw it down and dunk on guys. He was a pretty good, versatile defender. He could grab boards if he needed to. He did pretty much everything. He was not quite the defensive player that Derek was, but he could defend fours. So he could really play that four on that team, and it allowed Jason and Jalen to guard more wings and guard. So he was going to be a pretty important part of that team. And I mean, honestly, Hayward was getting good enough and healthy enough at the end of that last season with Boston when the bubble happens that if he just hadn't gotten hurt during the playoffs, I think he would have had a really good playoff run. And who knows, maybe he never would have gone to Charlotte and he would have stuck around. And he was good in Charlotte. For a few years there, he played really well in Charlotte.
Yeah, and I think even this year, he could do a little something to help OKC, for 15 to 20 minutes, but depending on the matchup, he is a high IQ that can handle and shoot the ball, so you never know. Defense is gone, but on some different scheme, it could be useful. Yeah, maybe something you wanted to add on Hayward?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, the last point guard I wanted to ask you about was Marcus Smart, because I feel he's been there for 9 years. So you covered the very beginning of Marcus Smart and the end. Did you expect him to be that impactful when he arrives at first?
Yeah, I mean, he's probably the most unique player I've ever been around.
Yeah.
Either him or Rondo. I mean, Boston has a great history of bringing in these very bizarre, distinct point guards, and Smart, Rondo was the most ingenious player I've ever seen in my life, and Smart was the most creative hustle player I've ever seen. And Smart would do all of these creative things off the ball and really daring and bizarre things to get to the ball.
Yeah.
And Rondo, you put the ball in his hands, he can do stuff that maybe 5 people in the history of the game could ever do. It's him. Bob Cousy was an equivalent back in the day. Pete Maravich was one of those magicians, and probably Magic and Chris Paul / Steve Nash. He was extremely, his ability to control the ball and get the ball to places was unparalleled. With Smart, he could throw all sorts of crazy passes, but what made him so fascinating was the way that he got to the ball, like the way he got the loose balls, the way he defended, the way that he would cut, crash the glass, all that kind of stuff. Like nothing about his game made sense. It was all so random, and it was really just kind of came down to he was fearless and willing to do anything in order to try to just get the ball and to get the win. And he had that level of dedication and fearlessness in a way that I don't think I've ever seen from anybody else. There's probably like a few players in history that you can think of that did it that way. And he was both like crazy, aggressive, angry, but also like really sweet and kind at the same time. And he was someone who like didn't really get mad at people. It was all just like a game to him. Like if you really pissed him off, he would laugh in your face. He wouldn't like necessarily want to fight you. I mean, sure, he did plenty of laughs, right? It's not like Draymond. Like Draymond, I think is is kind of a similar type of player, and really kind of similarities between Smart and Draymond. Like they're very, very similar players in so many ways. Besides obviously their size and their ability to dribble the ball, but like he was, I think, really he was just an insane competitor. Is an insane competitor, and he looks at it not as a fight against someone else, but really it's like more like almost like golf, where it's just like a fight to be your best individually or as a team, and it's all about the team and about him just trying to win basketball rather than hating the opponent necessarily, which is kind of like a feel that fills a lot of people. Although I feel like that's kind of gone from the game these days anyway.
Yeah, and the thing is like it's work on the bigger stage, because like even when he started at the Celtics, like he was getting on the starting lineup during the playoff pretty quickly. So it's not only like being fearless but stupid, it's like being fearless but having like quite the impact on the game, because there is some numbers of him that is not like efficient offensively, like his shoot wasn't great for example, but he always has kind of a big impact on the game. And from Brad Stevens to Udoka and even Mazzulla, they always gave him a lot of responsibilities. So it's not fearless like stupid in a stupid way to be fearless. Like he was a good like basketball mind from what I've seen from here.
Yes, absolutely. His risks were calculated. His decision on what calculates out to a good risk worth taking is probably pretty. The bar is low, but he was willing to take any risk really. What I loved about Smart was he reminded me of one of my favorite players ever, Manu Ginobili. And Manu Ginobili, what made him great was his fearlessness. He was someone, Greg Popovich has talked about this, that Manu was somebody who would do all sorts of stuff that would piss off Pop. He would throw the ball away, he would take some bad shots, he'd make mistakes. And eventually Pop accepted that, Manu is a wild stallion and you just have to let him roam free. And if you do that and you trust that he's going to do so much for you, and he's going to do a lot of things that nobody else can do because they're not as quick, creative, brilliant, and fearless. And if you just kind of give them that level of freedom, they're going to do more good than they are going to do harm. And I think in general, Smart was that. And though there were a lot of shots that people didn't like, generally most of the time, Smart was on a lot of teams that didn't have the level of offensive fluidity that you see from this Celtics team.
Yeah.
And there were just a lot of moments when nobody else was getting good shots, and the defense would give him shots. And I mean, his numbers weren't good for sure, but he was fearless in taking really important shots all the time. And frankly, if you give a talented shooter who doesn't have that fearlessness the same exact shot, maybe a little bit more open even, I think Smart has just as good of a chance in a lot of those scenarios because of his confidence and because of his comfort taking, using his normal form when the guy is closing out under him, being confident to make a decision, just not feeling that sense of panic and tensing up and losing that muscle memory. That's what Smart had, just his fight or flight response was as good as it could be. And so I was fine generally with a lot of the decisions that he made. I think that if you analyze them, they were well thought out risks. And you go back to even last year, game 6. whatever game against Philadelphia.
Yeah, game
where
6.
Smart hit that incredible touch shot to win it, and it was like a hair after the buzzer, right? It's like that shot was insane. It was like a quick little hot potato shot from 3, and he hit it to win it. It should have won it. Like, that's kind of stuff that it's just like that's like the Marcus Smart kind of thing. It's like, you can't do that with Sam Hauser. Sam Hauser's not going to get that. Maybe he will. But like it was like down by his waist, I feel like. He just had to quickly just like tap it, like volleyball set it basically. Like, that's a crazy shot that like you need to just have that. You need to have that kind of crazy switch in your head to be able to do stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned like Manu Ginobili, and they makes me think of one thing, because like we've been talking about the Celtics a lot, and even like back when I was in Boston, we mostly discussed about the Celtics. Like, how do you keep like your head around like the whole NBA, while at the same time most of the content that you create is around the Celtics, but like there's 29 other team, probably like 10 that you want to follow in case of playoff contention, plus Wembanyama, for example, like getting in. So like, how do you like keep the focus kind of everywhere when you still have to have one main area of focus?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. When you're on a beat for one specific team, it's pretty hard to just go around and keep up with everybody. So, one thing that's really helpful for me is NBA League Pass, and YouTube has those highlight packages. The NBA's YouTube highlights, though, they cut out. They only show you makes. They don't really show you defense. They don't show you all like the controversial calls, all that kind of stuff. So like, it doesn't give you a real picture a lot of the time, but it's good for just at least just like seeing like how our team's playing in general, what's their style, who's good, all that kind of stuff. And, I have probably one night a week where I kind of just sit down and I watch League Pass and I just kind of jump around. I mean, honestly, any night that I'm home and I see the Spurs are playing, I'm putting it on. Like, Wemby is just so insane to watch. It's just fascinating to watch him. And I think every year there's like 2 or 3 guys where you're just like, oh, if I'm home, I'm putting out League Pass. I'm watching this guy. I think this year Ant Edwards was in that. Was kind of like that type of player. SGA was pretty great to watch, but I think I'd seen him enough. It's just Minnesota was just such an interesting team to watch, to see how good they are. OKC was a lot of fun, but like, Wemby, Jalen Brunson in New York, it's like I've tried to watch him as much as I can, because it's just like cool watching somebody take that next step. So, I think you have a few of those people you're just really interested in, or you go through phases of it, or, obviously the big wave people I think mostly catch up is like when I get in the shower in the morning, I put on one podcast. I'm driving, I put on another podcast. I'm trying to generally catch what people are talking about, and that'll let me know like, oh, I should go check this thing out now. So, if you're a national writer, you're generally kind of maybe choosing a few sections of teams to focus at a time. You have some stories you're working on, so you pay attention to them and you jump in and out. I think as someone who's covering the Celtics primarily, it's a mixture of teams that are about to face the Celtics, so I'll start watching them. Like, if I see they have a game on, I'm around and catch that. And then just like League Pass highlights, YouTube highlights, listening to podcasts, and, kind of random sometimes.
Okay, because like Celtics are also like, you see so many games, because even though like you only follow the Celtics plays against like team like twice, sometimes 3-4 times a year, so you also have that to see like what's really happening and confirm what you've seen on the highlights. Regarding the Celtics, like, this is Brad Stevens like era for the like 10 years, for example. Like, I think it's been 10 years that like Brad Stevens arrived. Like, what it's been like to be around Brad Stevens? Like, is it someone you can like access, or he seems kind of close in a way? Like, you don't see him talk a lot. Like, I think I crossed him in the corridor back in Boston, but like it was like super discreet, I guess. So like, is it being something different being around him, or can you don't even like get something out of him from you?
Yeah, Brad's not the kind, like, there's GMs that like to hold court with the media that are super acceptable, that are constantly hanging around and all that kind of stuff. Brad's not that type. He's in Boston generally. I don't know how much of this is just like ownership likes to hire people with this personality type, but they tend to, I feel like they tend to bring in people that are kind of like to operate more behind the scenes.
Okay.
And so, it's like Missoula is very, very personable and engaging.
Yeah.
Udoka, and maybe it would have changed if we had more time with him in Boston, and because we were still under COVID rules, sort of, when the 1 year he was there. So, we didn't really get to mingle so much. He had a lot of assistants that were very approachable, and I was able to get to know a lot of them and did some stories, I think, with a few of them probably at some point. But Udoka was just not very engaged. He was definitely like a quieter guy. I think Mazzulla is someone who loves talking and banter and debating and all that kind of stuff. Brad is like a great politician. He's very polite. He's very charming. I would say charming. He's very charismatic, and he seems he's very easy to talk to. But I think he's like a politician who's very good at like keeping the conversation, kind of in like a middle ground, and then moving on and not lingering too much. And that's with I think with media and public faces. I know with people in the NBA and behind the scenes, he's really renowned as like a great leader, who's someone who's like really great to people. And most of the people that have worked with him have told me he's one of the most amazing people that they've met. And I gained a lot from Brad just by being around him. And, a lot of the theories that he preached over the years were things that I thought really impacted my life, just talking about growth mindset and like some of the books he would talk about I would read. And I learned a lot from them too that helped me become a better person. So it's like, I think I learned just from personal experience and from witnessing what he did with his teams. Like Brad's a great thought leader and a great teacher. Brad, I think, has done the GM job, really working from behind the scenes and being a shadow guy. And I think a lot of major organizations generally tend to do it that way, especially in major media markets. And I think the GMs in the smaller markets tend to have to work with the media more and stuff like that, because they kind of rely on the media to establish your job security and stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. But do you think he still has an impact on the coaching, like the way of coaching that Joe does? Because he's been Brad coached only for few years, but it seems to be one, as soon as he arrived, he was one of the best coaches in the NBA. So
yeah, he was a great coach.
Do you think he still have some influence, or he only use the trade to kind of influence the way he wants the team to play?
I've never really heard anyone come to me and be like Brad is telling Joe to do this, or really Joe's never brought up much of Brad helped me figure this out and that out. Maybe a little bit at some point. I think that Brad has been really, really careful about, since he stepped up to the front office, he has BS'd it a lot and kind of maybe lied a bit about how involved he is. He tries to be like, oh, no, I got no involvement. I don't even know who Joe Mazzulla is. It's all that kind of stuff. Because Brad doesn't have an ego. I'll give him credit, at least it doesn't seem to. Brad is really about respect for the franchise. Yeah. He is, and he also understands. He already has a resume strong enough that people are going to think positively of him. But at this point, he doesn't need to do anything to make himself look good. He's got the job. He's doing a great job. He's getting paid a lot of money. Unless the Celtics somehow completely fall apart, I think his job security is pretty good. But even if this team doesn't win the championship and they have to blow it all up, I'm pretty sure Brad's job security is going to be pretty fine. The organization loves Brad, and so Brad is, I think, happy to be oh, I got nothing to do with this. I just give Joe the players, and it's all on Joe. Mm-hmm. I think the reality is probably one, Brad hired Joe. Joe worked for Brad for a while. I think they have a really good relationship. So it would be ridiculous if Joe became the head coach and didn't come to Brad and be like, hey, can you teach me how to be the head coach? I think Brad was probably very involved. I think Brad gave Joe probably plenty of autonomy. I'm sure there were some times where Brad was do it this way, don't do it this way. And I'm just guessing. I don't really know. But you look at the way the team operated last year, sure, there was a lot of influence from what Brad was doing, but I think that team really reflected Joe's way of thinking. And you look at you hear the way Joe talks about his principles and his influences, both on and off the record. This team reflects a lot of the stuff that he's generally always thought and stuff that he's learned over the years. So this team is not, this team took on some of the principles that Brad was instilling over the last few years, but a lot of that was also probably influenced by Danny Ainge in their front office as well.
Yeah.
And they've generally been ahead of the curve on a lot of trends in the NBA.
Yeah.
And the team that they're going with this year, I think, was a little bit ahead of the curve compared to, where the league's going. The league's going back to more post-operating, and things of that nature. And those are their principles that they go by. But so I think Brad probably was a very good resource for Joe Mazzulla, but I don't get the sense that Brad dictated Joe Mazzulla.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think what thing that changed also like this year is like the coaching staff. They got Sam Cassell in. I think Charles Lee also like take a bit of an upside since also he's being like one of the candidates for the Charlotte Hornets jobs. So do you like see any difference like from the outside in the coaching staff? Because they seem very like easy to talk to. Like when I was around the Garden, like they would like ask me who I am and what I'm doing around, and like so it seemed like the coaching staff it's also another like window of like what's really happening. So do you see any difference between like this year and last year?
Yeah, and one other thing I should say that I think people generally don't say when they have the conversation about like this Brad influencing Joe, the GM is supposed to help the coach.
Yeah.
It's the GM's job. So like Brad should be helping Joe. It would be ridiculous for him not to be. So I think any perception that like Brad Stevens had something to do with the way Joe Mazzulla operates and like that he's continuing to consult him now, that's literally what the GM is supposed to be doing. And that's what GMs have been doing all the time. And a big part of it is like, a GM generally, when they bring a player to a team, a new player to a team, they know that player a lot better than the coach does. And so the coach gets to know that player, but also the GM and their front office generally has a better understanding of the history of that player.
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, like there's enough familiarity, they don't need the GM to help. But the GM is also going to guide the player, the coach, and the player to understand each other over the course of the year too. They're kind of like a buffer and a mediator between all of that. So like that's what the GM is supposed to do. They are supposed to be involved. It wouldn't be good if a GM like doesn't ever show up and do anything. Like GMs are generally are supposed to like not interfere with practices and games and give the coach that full authority. But they still should be around helping more on the coaching side than on the player side. And then going to Charles Lee and Sam Cassell, the funny thing is, so, last year, there was like obviously a little bit of a weirdness to the fact that Joe inherited Ime Udoka's coaching staff. And there were two layers to that. One, those were all Ime's guys. And not only were they just like the guys that Ime hired, they were like literally Ime's friends. Like everybody he hired was from Portland or San Antonio. And then they kept Joe Mazzulla, Tony Dobbins, DJ McClay, and maybe one other person, Craig Luschnitt, player development guys. It's like they kept a few of the guys that Brad had hired, but like most of the coaches were Ime's guys. And so then when Ime was gone, and then they didn't give the job to Damon Stoudemire, who was like kind of what everybody presumed would get the job.
Yeah.
And Joe got the job. There was awkwardness initially. I think that everybody that I talked to said that they formed a good relationship with Joe and that they were pretty much in good lockstep. That they all were working together and there wasn't any more of an Ime's guys and Joe's guys kind of perception or really Brad's guys perception. I think that wasn't so much of an issue. What really hurt them was they lost Damon mid-season last year because he got the Georgia Tech job. And Damon was their OG NBA vet guy. He was a really important part of that locker room. And that was something that like, they lost. And especially for Joe, who went from backbench assistant to head coach in one leap. He didn't even have front of the bench experience, which means, being more involved with making game plan decisions and working with the players during the games and like other, because that's like the kind of the higher level senior assistant kind of thing. And so, to take away that one coach that had like, it wasn't the only coach that had a lot of experience, like Ben Sullivan won a championship in Milwaukee and all that, but like he was the player in the year that. Now they have Sam Cassell, who was similar to Damon Stoudemire as well. And then Charles Lee is really, really smart and creative and charismatic and like has a lot of the same talents that Joe has. He's interviewed for a ton of jobs, so is Sam Cassell. And, I don't know why they haven't gotten one yet, but like Charles I think now with this team doing so well, probably gives him another like really strong season on his resume that could help him. He's interviewing for the Charlotte job. I actually think he'd be a good fit for that Charlotte job. There's a few other good candidates, but Charles, they brought in Drew Holiday, and his part of that was like Charles knows Drew Holiday really well. Charles worked with Drew Holiday in Milwaukee. He knew, you see what they've done with Drew. Like, they've used Drew in so many different ways, and Charles has been really crucial in learning that. And like, those guys work together really closely. You can see them on the court. They're like talking trash to each other. They are, going over all sorts of conceptual stuff together. I mean, frankly, I don't think there's a single player with assistant coach like Aaron that I see kind of go over stuff during shoot-arounds and practices and pregame more than I see Charles and Drew. Like, I see them getting into like really, really big debates and like conversations and walking through stuff all the time. And that might just be because like the way the scheduling of the work is that like they're doing it and the media's there. But like, you can see that there's like a real intellectual bond between the two of them. And you can see that they really hit it off. And I think Drew also has that with Joe as well. Joe has really loved coaching Drew, and Drew has been able to kind of unlock a lot of creativity for Joe, and Joe's really loved it. So this staff this year, I think it fits Joe a little bit better. And I mean, just like, they have two high-level assistants this year. Yeah. And that's different. Like, both Cassell and Charles have been like associate head coaches or like top level assistants, and they bring very different skills to the table. So the coaching staff's been really good this year.
Yeah, and I think they kind of have like all the cards in hand to get through this year. But do you see like them as clear favorite because of this regular season, or do you still have doubts?
So they're the clear favorite in the East. Like, the East just isn't good. Like, the East kind of sucks. There's no other team. Like, the two best teams in the East besides Boston might be Miami and Philly. Like, genuinely, those might be the two best in the end.
Yeah, I think so.
Milwaukee's been a mess, and Milwaukee doesn't have Giannis for at least the first game, probably more than that, right? So, like, who knows? Milwaukee might not get Giannis back, and they might lose again in the first game. That's very possible. Or, he's hurt and they lose. Considering they're going to get either Philly or Miami, both teams that are really good, right? And then, Cleveland has been kind of like spiraling, and they're kind of lost. New York is playing great, but they just don't have that much offensive talent with Julius Randle out. It's like, if a team does well on Jalen Brunson, it's like, who's going to score for them? Like, who's going to lead their scoring? So, New York, they probably just don't have the firepower to get to the finals. And then after that, it's like, who else? Like, Orlando is just too young. They don't have the point guard play. I really like Orlando. They're going to be fun, but they're not going to win more than one series. Indiana is like a huge maybe. And then, am I forgetting anybody? No, I guess it's everybody, right? Like, Chicago and Atlanta, even if they somehow made the first round, they're not winning the series. Like, they're not even coming close. So, Boston getting out of the East is, I would say, very likely. They are probably the biggest favorite in the Eastern Conference since like LeBron was in the East. Maybe I'm forgetting somebody, but like they're an overwhelming favorite. Then you get to the West, and I mean, listen, like, Denver's beaten them twice. They don't have good personnel for Denver unless Horford really plays amazing. But you also don't want to be playing Horford at the games because your best lineup is without Horford out there, right? Also, obviously, it's like, if they make it to the finals, how good is KP going to be at that point? Is he going to be healthy? Is he going to still be playing at a high level? Or is he going to be really dragging around? Because KP has never made it past the first round. And you're adding an extra month plus of basketball, the most intense basketball, onto KP's body. I would be really surprised if he's still that good. He probably will be dragging more than most of the other players. But who knows? Maybe not. And honestly, if he's not, I would expect him to certainly win the championship because of the talent that they have. If KP is still playing at a really, really high level and still looks fresh, then that would like, they're so good, they should win it. So, but Denver is like the one team that like very obviously could win it. They were better in the two games. Oklahoma is they're really, really good. They're really fun. I just don't think anybody expects a team that young who doesn't have any good power bigs to go up against Jokic and other bigs that they're going to see, other power guys. It's like Chet is really good, but Chet would get destroyed by Jokic. And they don't really have anyone else to guard Jokic that I can think of off the top of my head. I don't know what they're going to do for that. Minnesota just like going to drop coverage team, really win like that. Like they have to have some switch. I mean, Denver doesn't switch as much either, so who knows? But like Minnesota has a good shot, but not a great shot. And after that, it's like maybe the Clippers really get together, but like there's not a team in the West. Like Dallas maybe, but I would be surprised about Dallas. It comes down to them. And Denver is there's no reason to think that they can. There's no reason to pick a favorite, I would say, in that series coming into it fresh at this point. Even though Denver did beat them both times, you give Boston 7 games, and I think their offense can be good enough that they can win that series. And it's like Boston's just been so good that as good of a matchup as Denver is for them, it's just like Boston has just been so flexible offensively. Yeah. And Denver, between Jokic and Murray, they have 2 weak points defensively. They did not. I mean, frankly, like Gordon's really good defensively. KCP is a great defender. MPJ is like sometimes, but it's like there's a lot of defensive weak points that they can really go after. And so I think if Boston has a good shooting series, they probably would beat Denver. But it's like it's pretty much dead even. And if we get to that point, I don't know who I'm picking. I have no idea.
Yeah, because and before that, maybe Philadelphia for me is like the most difficult matchup because now they have a good coach, a real basketball coach, and I have like I can remember like the bubble series against Toronto, like Nick Nurse against Brad Stevens. It was quite a big deal in terms of like tactical adjustment and all that, and I feel like in the East, the biggest opponent for the Celtics would be Joel Embiid, if healthy, with the 76ers, because now they have like the coaching staff, plus Maxi has been really good, and they also have more dynamic players next to Embiid. Like I feel like Batum and also Buddy Hield next to Embiid will be something they didn't have before. They didn't have that off-ball power. So if it goes the first round, like it would be kind of a crazy one, like the first one we got like 2 years ago against the Nets, which looked like a conference final and was only a first round. So on the East, I'd say like the Sixer would be the only one that could beat the Celtics. Maybe Miami Heat, because you really never know what could happen with Miami Heat. And for the Knicks, I think it's once you stop Brunson, like you said, like there is no much you can do because they don't have Randall. So they're gonna spam the pick and roll with Hartenstein and the end off with Brunson. But if you can find a way, and with Jrue Holiday and Derek White, you could find a way to stop that. So then you go maybe to the final. But in the final, I have more doubts because I feel like Porzingis can be targeted a lot, and what we didn't see in the regular season is like teams scheming against the Celtics, because it was brand new Celtics, so people didn't really have much scheming to do, and they were like so good at shot making that even if you scheme a little bit, that wasn't enough. But in the playoff, like teams they're going to go right at Porzingis. They're gonna like to exploit the fact that he can't move that much. And also, I feel like Al Horford has been quite older, and you can see it like a couple years ago. Like you can see Al Horford getting older, but I feel like this is the year you can kind of see it. And if Tillman plays, then you lack of spacing. So I have my like against good coaching. This is where I have my doubts against the Celtics, because I feel like you could scheme against them.
So if I'm an opponent, if I have a stretch, especially if I have a stretch 5, my start of the game, I am doing everything I can to pull Porzingis out. I want Porzingis moving his feet on defense early. I want Porzingis, because Porzingis is going to drop initially, and you want to punish him with some open threes and get him out of there and get him in this mindset that he needs to move and work on defense and all that stuff. So that's like your first thing you're trying to do. I think offenses will try to get Porzingis isolated on a guard late in game. We'll probably see some more of that. I think Porzingis is fairly well equipped to handle that. There's not a lot of there's not a lot of guys that can really get a shot off over Porzingis unless they completely cross him up. But like if Porzingis is giving them a little space with a hand up, most guys aren't getting a clean shot. So I think that's probably the main target point. And then the other big thing is, so their offense is all read and react. Their offense is all, we're going to see what the coverages are from the defense. We're going to see what the personnel is. And we're going to get this guy involved with this action, blah, blah, blah. They have a bunch of different options of how they do it, but it's like not limitless. And there's some understanding of how they operate. It's not completely unpredictable. And so when you have 7 games against Boston, you can start to understand their patterns and what they're looking for. And so you can either avoid it or you can, accept it and know how you want to defend it. And so a lot of the elements that it's just like, because during the regular season, you face Charlotte and then you face Boston the next game, and you only have one day to prepare for it. And then once you go through it, you can't make an adjustment for the next game.
Yeah.
A lot of those advantages kind of start to go away. And it's kind of like a cat and mouse game of like, all right, you take this away from the Celtics, what are they going to do next? And every series goes that way, but most of the best teams that win it generally have a player that is like, you can't take this away. And, with Jokic, so Jokic is the obvious one. Like, you can't take it all away. He's just going to beat you when you have the right coverages on him. And so the Celtics need somebody to step up and do that. And I think what gives you hope for them is that it's not just about Tatum and Brown, but also like there are nights they can give it to White, give it to Porzingis, let Holiday do it. Like they have enough ball handling creativity that if a defense is denying Tatum the ball and Tatum just can't get the ball in rhythm, in sync with the actions, they can go away. Like they can go away from it. They can go to Derek. They can go to Drew. They can have Jalen. Like they have all these options. They're not reliant on one guy. And so that's generally why they've been so good this year. And it's why over the course of 7 games, I think they will probably come out on top. Because people will always go best player wins, but it's like not always. Like if you have the depth that Boston has across the board, they have great depth. They have great 1 through 5 depth. They have solid 6 through 8 depth. Like they have the depth that they need to win. And I think Horford, as long as he's healthy, doesn't get injured, will be fine and probably play over Tillman most of the time. Like playoff Horford is a thing. Even though every time I ask him about it, he insists it's not. It's like, come on, I'm not an idiot. I'm watching it like it's happening. You're clearly playing harder. You are clearly more athletic. You're clearly playing with anger. Like all this stuff that you never do in the regular season or 2 months in a blue bit. Like it's obviously a difference. Horford steps up. He doesn't last the whole playoff run because it's 2 months of playing the most intense basketball that he can handle. It's like it's not going to last for the time. And he can pace himself more since he's not just starting big, right? So they have the recipe. Like they have their. I mean, what's great for them is they got a cookbook. It's not one recipe. Like Denver is like a little like they have probably a handful of things they can do, and they do probably 3 of them at the highest level in the NBA. But like the Celtics have like 12 things that they can do. They have so much personnel they can do it with. Like if you look at Denver, if Jokic isn't running the offense, they usually are relying on Murray to have a great ISO quarter, which he does a lot. Then after that, it's like, who's giving them creation? They don't get a lot of creation. Yeah. Boston has 5 guys that can create. And that's like, there's no one else in the NBA that's really close to that. Milwaukee has 2.5. I think hopefully Middleton will be really good in the playoffs. And hopefully Giannis comes back and they have some run. And like, that's 3 if Middleton plays that way. It's like, there's not many teams that you can put out a lineup where the play can run through any of them. And I'm trying to think of a team in recent memory that had that. Pretty hard to think of it. I guess like the Warriors when they had KD and Iggy closing, it's like they kind of had that for sure. But it's like pretty rare to have 5 creators out there. KD can create out the post pretty effectively. So very, very unique and special team for sure.
Yeah, I think one thing that could be complicated, or maybe that I'm afraid of, is like the lack of synergy between the players. I feel like individually those guys are like incredible. And like you said, like there is five guys that can create offense. But what like frightened me maybe as a fan is like the lack of synergy, especially when it comes to Jason and Jalen. I feel like, and they've been together since forever because they've been playing together since they've been drafted, kind of. But I feel like you don't see much of the synergy between them like you could see with Murray and Jokic. Like Murray is probably not a better player than Jalen Brown, but the way he's being used around Jokic makes him a better player because like there is synergy between them. And is it something that you see like the relation between Jason and Jalen seems to be like very good outside of the court, but it's more like on the court. Like, is it something that you see developing, or you also being questioned about?
I think last season it probably got to the point that they were finally clicking pretty well, right? I think so. So this year it's been good. I mean, this year, what's different this year is because of all the creators they have, they don't really rely on those two to play off of each other as much. And I think actually what's really interesting is, especially compared to last year, now that D White's really the point guard, Holiday can kind of play every position, and Porzingis commands so much attention on the ball. Like last year, like Rob Williams was off the ball. Rob Williams barely touched the ball. KP probably holds the ball almost as much as any of these people do, right? So like his time of possession is probably as long, if not longer, than anyone else. So those guys don't have to handle the ball nearly as much. And you also can put them in random spots in the offense a lot more. They're not reliant on like putting them over the two slots and making sure that they're balanced in the floor. That's part of what makes the Celtics so difficult is like let's say there's a defender that you really want to get away from the ball. You could just take Jason Tatum and park him in the corner, and that's fine. Because they got three other guys that can run around with KP, and their offense is going to be totally fine. You're going to take it's like Giannis. Like we're going up against the Bucks. You want Giannis out of the play. You can put JT in the corner and just play with that JT and keep Giannis stuck there. And JT is an elite shooter from the corner, so probably. So you can just pick out the JT, and then if they close out hard to JT, you have JT attacking the paint with advantage, one of the best players in the league. So it's like the Celtics probably could win a series without JT running the offense out. They probably could do it. I don't know about Denver, but like most of these teams, they could do it. And so that they're not as reliant on that distinct connection of Jalen and Jason. And I don't think that they have. I haven't even thought about that this year. Honestly, I haven't thought about it until you just asked me now, and that's probably a really good sign for them.
Yeah, I think that's also a good point that Jason isn't like a star that he needs to have the ball all of the time. And I think that creates so much value, having a star player that doesn't need the ball that much because he can create value without the ball and is also a very good defender. And I feel like nobody talks about that. Is never like mentioned in all defensive teams and stuff like that, but I feel like is probably like the third or the second best defender on the team when it comes to off-ball defense, being at the nail, being on the help. I think compared to Jalen, for example, I prefer way more the defense that Jason brought because collectively he has a bigger impact. It doesn't show up much on the box score, but to my opinion, Jason Tatum is the best two-way player in the NBA when it comes to having like great offense and great defense.
For a wing, yeah, he's probably the best two-way wing in the league right
Two-way
now.
wing, yeah.
I think he's better.
Yeah.
I think he's better than Kawhi Leonard at this point. I mean, like Joel Embiid, I think is still better than Jason, and he's still healthy. Like Joel probably would have been MVP if he was still healthy. Maybe. But yeah, no, like SGA, I don't think he defends at that level quite like JT does. Also, my computer is going to die in 5 minutes, just so that. But so back to the pod. Jalen and Jason are different. And I think Jason probably does the more important things to build a team around. But I do always maintain, I think Jalen is so important in that Jalen is kind of the opposite player. Like Jalen is super aggressive and super fast and super athletic. And he can do all the stuff that Jason doesn't do as well. And like a big thing on defense is, so Jalen falls asleep on defense. And in general, like Jalen just has a weird thing where like he just kind of like his brain shuts down, or he just kind of like, that's why he fumbles the ball away sometimes. That's why his passive vision hasn't been as good. It's a weird trait of Jalen's. And Jalen does a lot of things like at an extremely high, like as good as it gets in the NBA level. And he makes mistakes or he just kind of gets lost. But the thing is, like Jalen's defensive pressure at point of attack, his stamina to do it, and his physicality are a lot better than Jason. And so JT is a really, really smooth defender. He's good at like getting in front of somebody, getting the stretch out to them, getting low and wide, and generally steering them where he wants. But like Jalen fights through screens better. Jalen has that dog in him more. Jalen presses. Jalen takes off the guards and does a good job. Like Jalen brings the physicality and the energy intensity. And it's like you need both of those defenders.
Yeah.
And so it's like I think JT probably makes less mistakes and he's more impactful at the rim. But Jalen like gets more steals, more deflections, and he makes a lot of the bigger. He's more of a big play kind of guy and more of an intensity kind of guy.
Yeah.
They balance each other out really well. I don't know who's a better defender between the two of them because they're different. It's like I think it comes down to if you're building a team, Tatum is the first person you would pick, but then you would probably pick Jason. You want Jalen as well too, right? Tatum is more of a foundational piece that sets everything up, and Jalen is more of an action trigger piece that executes it.
Yeah, but that makes sense. I think they're finding balance more and more, and offense and defense. So maybe that will be the year people will kind of start to believe in their duo. But I think Derek White and the team that Brad has put around them kind of like make them better. And that's the first time since they've been together in the same team then like the minutes of Jaylen Brown when he's on the court without Jason doesn't look that bad in terms of like offensive rating. So I think with all the trades that made, they didn't only optimize Jason, they optimized the duo being like together on the court, but also only one of them on the court. And I think that's one of the great job that hasn't been talked much is like how to optimize those two players that are close to be top 10. Like Jason might be top 10 player, but won't probably never be like above the top 5. But you still have those two players that are so good, so you need to optimize them. And I think they've done a great job for that. So we'll see where it gets for the playoff. We'll say thank you before your computer dies, and we'll probably have maybe another chat after the season to like take a bilan, like we said in French, of the season and what's coming next. So thank you very much, Jared.
All right, this was a good souvenir.
Yeah, it was good. Thank you very much for taking the time. That was fun.
About a 2-second difference between the shot clock and game clock. Thomas on the drive, pull-up jumper, it's good! Isaiah Thomas gives the Celtics the lead with 2.4 remaining. 13 fourth quarter points. And Atlanta calls their final timeout. So many big shots for both teams, Jeff, down the stretch.